The story of 2-6 goes back to the mid or late 1960s when a group of boys started a baseball team called the Five-Stair Step. These boys went to McCormick Elementary at 2712 South Sawyer Avenue in Chicago. At the time, the boys were 11 to 12 years old. In the year 1970, the boys numbered about 20 members and still played softball at McCormick and were now 13 to 14 years of age. The boys hung out at 26th and Sawyer, which was not far from McCormick. At the time, Ridgeway Lords and Latin Kings were growing larger in size and began more aggressive recruitment. This led to the boys having conflict with both groups as both gangs were allies. Around Thanksgiving time of 1970, Crazy Dave and two others came up with the 2-6 name for themselves and the organization was born. The 2-6 were not like other gangs in the area because they did not wear colors, have symbols, and they didn't spray paint symbols or represent heavily. They just knew who they were and so did enemies, and they dealt with those enemies. By 1972, the 2-6 became a little more known around the South Side as far as the Midway area, but they still were not a heavily known group. In the later part of 1973, the original 2-6 members began to recruit new members outside of Gary Elementary School located at 31st and Hamlin, making the group a little larger in size. In the year 1975, 2-6 was big in that area near the school. By this time, 2-6 was hanging out at Sugar Lounge located at 26th and Sawyer. This is when the original 2-6 began to come up with plans to take over the K-Town area of Little Village. The second chapter of 2-6 began in the year 1977 in wake of the growing gang population in the Little Village area. This began with the arrival of Teddy Sweetwine Ordonez, who was 26 years old at the time. Teddy had just moved from the South Chicago neighborhood and was a member of the Bush Nation gang and was known to be one tough and down member of that club. Now he became 2-6 in 1977. Sweetwine was from the notorious Montemayor family that was known for controlling a major part of the heroin drug trade connecting Mexico to Texas, then Texas to Chicago. The pipeline then continued from Chicago to Detroit, and the Montemayors were the largest suppliers of heroin on the west side of Chicago since 1970. When Sweetwine married Ayala's daughter, this connected the Montemayors and the Ayalas together for business. This connected 2-6 with the cartels of Mexico. One of the bigger dealers in the area was Alfonso Ayala Sr., who operated a drug business out of his clothing store at the intersection of 26th and Kedvale called Alfonso and Elias. Ayala was said to have strong connections with the Mexican mafia. Sweetwine was known for being a very tough individual and could take on several in a fight. Sweetwine was born in 1951 and originally was from the South Chicago neighborhood, and he was part of the Bush Nation gang, which was the first prominent gang in South Chicago. It was here that Sweetwine became a legend that even fought several police officers at once on one occasion. The 2-6 crew met at the sweater shop owned by Alfonso Ayala Sr. on the second floor to do business, as it was guarded by bouncers with guns. The 2-6 crew was not a gang that had colors or anything like that. The Montemayor family was headed at the time by Matias Montemayor, Benito Montemayor, Menardo Montemayor, and Manuel Montemayor. The Montemayors would end up facing prosecution in the early 1980s over heroin trafficking, but at this time in the 70s they were just getting started in Chicago. The 2-6 crew was connected by 1977. Because of the connections with the cartels of Mexico, the 2-6 crew was supplied with superior firepower over all the other street gangs in the neighborhood, especially Ridgeway Lords and Latin Kings. Shortly after, Alfonso Ayala's oldest son Tyrone joined the 2-6, followed by Alfonso Jr., who was 16 at the time, then followed by David Ayala, who was the third oldest and was 14 at the time, then eventually the youngest brother Joey joined. In the year 1977, 16-year-old Alfonso Ayala Jr., the son of Alfonso Sr., took the 2-6 name in conjunction with the 2-6 crew and converted the 2-6 into a street gang, giving the organization their colors of black and beige, their sweaters and symbols. This is when Alfonso's 14-year-old brother David Ayala became a 2-6, now that it was a gang for youths too. The kids from the baseball team, including Carmelo aka Fish, all joined 2-6 in 1977, and immediately after formation the 2-6 became a major force to be reckoned with, especially since they were connected to the Ayalas. the cartel, and the Montemayor family. Since the majority of the Montemayors resided in Texas, this is how 2-6 as an organization became so connected to the state of Texas and were able to open chapters in that state over the years. 2-6 ran into other rivalries in the area, including vicious wars with Satan Disciples, Ambrose, Villalobos, and Artistic Kents. 2-6 did ally up with Sin City Boys and even flipped some of their members into 2-6 once they became a street gang in 1977. In the year 1977, 2-6 immediately began rapid expansion as they opened the K-Town 2-6 branch in western Little Village, in the area bounded by 26th Street on the north, 32nd Street on the south, Pulaski Road on the east, and Costner Avenue on the west, which is technically part of the K-Town section of Chicago, making this section name-fitting. The reason K-Town section started is because the Ayala family moved to this area, and the Ayala family had their clothing store in this area. Also, in 1977, 2-6 opened up the Chi-Town 2-6 branch right after K-Town opened in the area of Little Village, bounded by 23rd Street on the north, 33rd Street on the south, Hamlin Avenue on the east, and Pulaski Road on the west. This section was right next to K-Town 2-6, divided by Pulaski Road. In 1977, 2-6 opened up the Darkside 2-6 branch located in Little Village in an area bounded by 24th Street on the north, 26th Street on the south, Pulaski Road on the east, and Costner Avenue on the west. Darkside 2-6 was right next to K-Town 2-6 turf, and the factions were divided by 26th Street. In 1977, as 2-6 was spreading to the K-Town section, Alfonso Jr. had moved to the intersection of 38th and Albany in the Brighton Park community. This section would become one of their notorious sections as they recruited some heavy-hitting members here. 2-6 was perhaps one of the first Mexican street gangs in this white neighborhood as they fought white greaser clubs. At the same time 2-6 was opening 38th Street, they arrived right around that time in 1977 in the Garfield Ridge neighborhood as they clashed with the insane popes that formed in that area. Although 2-6 did not yet claim turf in the Midway area, they loved to pop in frequently and fight with the popes. In 1977, 2-6 opened in the Marquette Park neighborhood at 63rd Street and from Campbell to Talman. 2-6 arrived alongside the first wave of Mexican migration to the Marquette Park community and became one of the first major gangs to settle here. At the time, Marquette Park had a strong white power and neo-Nazi group presence that often bullied freshly arrived Mexican youths, and 2-6 served as a protector if need be. However, the biggest rival 2-6 would end up facing was Ambrose, that also settled the same year on 63rd Street. The two become arch enemies as they were the only Hispanic gangs in the neighborhood. The late 70s was a time of great expansion for 2-6, and by 1982 6 opened in the suburbs of Cicero and Joliet. The Cicero branch was Alfonso Jr.'s idea in 1979, but it didn't open until January of 1980 because Al Jr. was shot to death in 1979. Despite being a newer organization, the 2-6 Nation were invited into the Folk Nation Alliance in the year 1978. Because 2-6 had allied and started doing business with the Black Gangster Disciples, and because 2-6 now dominated almost all of West Little Village. 2-6 was also considered a great candidate because at the time they were one of the fastest growing organizations in the city, and their connections to the cartel ran very deep at the time. This is when 2-6 took on the name Gangster 2-6. The Satan Disciples and Ambrose had also established deep connections with the Black Gangster Disciples, and the Satan Disciples also adopted the first name of Gangster. This dramatically reduced the violence between 2-6 and SDs and 2-6 and Ambrose, and in many instances the three gangs even partied together and also hung out with the 2-2 boys. 2-6 often showed their allegiance with Satan Disciples by tagging 2-6 Disciples on the wall. The allegiance with 2-2 boys was shown by tagging 2-2-6 on the wall. After the Ridgeway Lords went to war with Latin Kings, they allied with Satan Disciples and Ridgeway Lords in an alliance called LTD, or Lords 2-6 Disciples, in 1980. I do not know the whole story of how 2-6 linked up with Black Gangster Disciples, but it very well may have been for a drug connect. Or the link may have been established because they did hits for each other, like how the relationship developed between Ambrose and BGDs. Another result of the Folk Alliance was the formation of the Insane Alliance, which is not to be confused with the North Side Insane Familia. Satan disciples, 2-6 and 2-2 boys, were all insane, while 2-6 and SDs were insane gangster. At some point in time, Alfonso Ayala Sr. moved out of Little Village and into the suburb of Westchester, Illinois, while he continued to run his business in Little Village. With great expansion brought great tragedy, as Alfonso Ayala Jr. became heavily marked being the leader of such a fast-growing organization. On August 31, 1979, Alfonso Ayala was shot to death on a front porch in a drive-by shooting. He was killed at 18 years old. After Ayala was killed, his 16-year-old younger brother David Ayala took over leadership of the organization, and this really began the legacy of David Ayala. Rivals can attest that David Ayala is what they described as a badass that earned his reputation for being a hell of a street warrior. Many feared and respected David Ayala, as he was the main one that put the legend in the 2-6 name. David traveled with his brother Alfonso to different sections in the city and hung at 38th and Albany, while 2-6 was just getting started there. In the year 1982, 2-6 opened a section in the back of the Yards neighborhood at 47th and Damon, as they arrived alongside a wave of Mexican migration to the neighborhood that brought other rival gangs like Latin Kings and Bishops. The 2-6 especially battled the Saints. 2-6 also recruited many new gangs into the Folk Alliance starting in the year 1981 after Folk and People spread to the streets. Some of the gangs they converted were Latin Souls, La Raza, Party People, and Sin City Boys. 2-6 also began hanging out in the suburb of Cicero in the very late 1970s, and by 1980 they had settled at 19th and Cicero Avenue just outside of the Grant Works section. 2-6 began to war with Noble Knights and 12th Street players. By 1984 this section of 2-6 became very developed and Cicero 2-6 became very well known. On Super Bowl Sunday on January 25, 1981, more tragedy came for the Ayala family. Alfonso Ayala decided to watch the Super Bowl at Bonnie's Tavern, located at 2701 South Karlov Avenue, which is at the intersection of 27th and Karlov. That afternoon, two black males were spotted standing around on that corner after they pulled up in their car. The men were just hanging around the corner, which caused suspicion by a resident that asked them what they were doing there according to court documents. The men questioned the two of them because two black men hanging out in a Mexican neighborhood was odd, as these two stuck out like a sore thumb. According to the court documents, the two black males entered Bonnie's Tavern through different doors, one through the side door and one through the front door. One of the men was Clayton Rockman, who asked the bartender where the bathroom was. A very short time later, Rockman and the other man started shooting as they gunned down Alfonso Ayala, then fled out the side door. Rockman was later arrested and convicted of the murder. He is still in prison for the crime. Rumor has it that Alfonso Ayala Sr. was killed by an organized hit by corrupt Chicago police officer Charles C.W. Wilson. Wilson was imprisoned in 1982 on allegations of taking bribes from big-time heroin dealers on the west side of the city. It was said that Ayala owed Wilson money, and when he didn't pay, Wilson had him killed. Also in 1981, David Ayala was able to purchase his very own home in the suburb of Westchester, Illinois, so he could be near his mother. It was indeed shocking that a young 18-year-old gang leader had the money to buy his own $160,000 home with a swimming pool and Buick Electra, but drug sales helped make that happen, along with money his father may have left him. In the newspapers and court documents, David Ayala allegedly held a meeting at his suburban home on August 16, 1981 in Westchester, Illinois, discussing a perfect attempt to wipe out more Latin Kings. The discussion led to a sighting of Latin Kings at Petrowski Park at 4247 West 31st Street, located in the Little Village neighborhood. Ayala then loaded the van that he owned with a shotgun and machine gun, as well as a rifle and a pistol. With Ruben Palomo and James Soto, they headed to the park where a baseball game was being held. When they arrived at the park, they parked the van in an alley behind the park. The two shooters then got out and stormed the park, firing several bullets into the crowd, striking 3 people. 2 of them died. Unfortunately, the 2 that died were not members of the Latin Kings, but the one that was wounded was indeed a Latin King gang member. By October 1981, Ayala was arrested, then convicted of the murders in 1983 and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. These are what the courts and the papers say happened back in 1981, but there is much speculation that it is not exactly true. The real truth may very well be that these shooters went rouge and shot at the wrong people and went against Ayala and screwed up big time. Many contest that Ayala has been unjustly convicted of this crime and should not be in federal prison for the rest of his life. I will put it this way, this is a man that knew how to make money and became a don at a young age. He was taught the ways of how to carry out careful business by his mentors and was advanced beyond his years, so to order this type of messy shooting is outside his character and not how he normally handled business. So one has to think, could it be true that he didn't order this shooting, or at least didn't order it to be in broad daylight at baseball players? It is something to ponder, and if there is an injustice, it needs to be known. Behind bars, Ayala was still able to successfully run the 2-6 organization all throughout the 1980s and was able to direct street leaders. Ayala was highly respected and feared behind prison walls, not only because of his connections beyond 2-6, but also because of how he did business, and he was said to have more money than any gang leader in the Chicago area. He paid cash money for his cars and suburban home in Westchester. Behind bars, he was pivotal within the Latin Folks Alliance and was one of the biggest voices within the folk nation. Another tragedy struck on September 23, 1981, when Teddy Sweetwine Ordonez was shot and killed in 1981. He was killed at 30 years old and was a respected founder. After 38th and Albany, 2-6 spread deep into the streets of Brighton Park and became a major force in this area. By 1982, in Brighton Park, Satan disciples were arriving, and this sparked a conflict with Satan disciples that was on and off. The date November 7, 1986 would bring an end to the 2-2-6 Alliance, LTD Alliance, and the Ambrose and 2-6 Alliance forever. On that day, 28th and Hamlin 2-6 were informed that Ambrose gang members had been spotted shooting at 2-6 in the K-Town area. Ambrose allegedly opened fire on 2-6 members because of a dispute of a girl. 2-6 gang members Jason Gray, Little Hulk, Stoney, and Inky all sought to avenge this shooting according to court documents. Jason Gray and Little Hulk caught 2 Ambrose gang members at a 7-Eleven and beat them up in the parking lot according to court documents, and then they spotted 2 gang members that looked like Ambrose gang members in that same parking lot, then pursued them after they pulled away. Jason Gray and Little Hulk and a third 2-6 started throwing bottles and flashing gang signs at the gang members they thought were Ambrose, but it turned out they were actually 2 boys from Cicero coming to visit Ambrose's friends. But that was not realized until when they caught those same gang members on California Avenue, and they clearly flashed 2 gang signs. Later on that night, the 2-6 heard about a party going on in Marquette Park at 63rd and Washtenaw, so they sent 2 2-6 girl gang members to the party to scope it out. The girls aroused suspicion when they arrived and were unfriendly to everyone as they were dressed in black and beige, so they were asked to leave. A few hours later, Jason Gray, Stoney, Little Hulk, and Inky crashed the party and knocked on the basement door where the party was being held at 6318 South Washtenaw. When the door was opened, Jason Gray began shooting, then Little Hulk joined him as they shot down 4 people in the party. 3 of them died. One that was killed was a 2 boy gang member, and the injured one was a 2 as well according to court documents. Manuel Bobe, also known as Little Hulk, was convicted of the murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He currently is still in prison for the crime. Jason Gray's conviction was overturned many years later in 1992. 2-6 would now be in a full state of war with 2 boys and Ambrose. That was a shocking war at that time. 2 of the other shooting victims at the party were Satan Disciples gang members, which started a major war between 2-6 and Satan Disciples. Now 2-6 was now at war with 3 allies, all in one day's work. After this war kicked off with Satan Disciples and 2 boys, the 2-6 was no longer in the insane group, but they remained Gangster 2-6 as of November 1986. In the year 1988, 2-6 expanded into the Gage Park community at 59th and Rockwell, once again conflicting with Ambrose as they also settled 59th that same year. This was also the year that Mexican people first began settling the Gage Park community from 55th to 59th Streets. Latin Kings also arrived in the same year along with Party People. Party People and 2-6 formed an alliance on these streets as they both challenged the Crown Town Latin Kings. This section would last until 1993. In the year 1990, 2-6 expanded more onto the southwest side of Chicago as they opened in the area of 79th and Pulaski in the Ashburn community and around 63rd and Pulaski in the West Lawn neighborhood. In these two neighborhoods, 2-6 settled at the same time as Satan Disciples, which further intensified that war. 2-6 also colonized 63rd Street in the Clearing neighborhood, where they once again would find conflict with Satan Disciples and insane popes settling the same area. In the early 1990s, 2-6 expansion grew larger as they landed in more suburbs like Schaumburg, Romeoville, Bolingbrook, and Hoffman Estates, all spawned from the 38th and Albany chapter. In the early 1990s, 2-6 would begin engaging in wars with former folk allies such as Crazy Get Down Boys and Maniac Latin Disciples. A war developed between 2-6 factions at some point in the 1990s that left several members killed. In 1996, 2-6 even had a war with the Gangster Disciples that got really vicious for a while because of drug operations in Cicero, Illinois. This war was a shocker at the time because GDs and 2-6 were close allies. The 2-6 would break out into war with their close ally La Raza in 1997. In the 1980s and 1990s, the 2-6 would open in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood at Belden and Major, and Albany Park at Sunnyside and Bernard, South Chicago at 92nd and Exchange, and in Portage Park at Addison and Major. By 1998, David Ayala was transferred to TAM's Supermax facility at 8500 Supermax Road in Tams, Illinois. Now Ayala was fully cut off from any 2-6 operations. 2 years later, David Ayala announced he was no longer affiliated with the 2-6 organization, but he was kept locked up in Tams until the facility closed in 2013. An article came out in 2009 making David look crazy as one of his activities was feeding spiders insects. That belief that he went nuts is not true, but what is true is that treatment at Tams for prisoners was beyond horrific, and the cut-off of human contact was terrible on the minds of prisoners there. Feeding spiders is a healthy outlet, and there isn't much else to do, especially when human contact was non-existent. There are some interesting articles out there about Tams that I would recommend reading if you really want to understand life there. Then perhaps you will understand the suffering there. David Ayala did not go insane at Tams, but should not have been sent there in the first place, or at least should not have been there 14 years. The city of Chicago and law enforcement in the 1980s and 1990s had been notoriously known for hastily and illegally locking up gang leaders, or any guys within the various organizations of Chicago. In the David Ayala case, he was provided an attorney right off the bat that was sloppy, lazy, and flat out didn't like David. This attorney had no passion as he worked with many gang members and was perhaps burned out from it, or judgment grew within him. The other attorney on the case failed as well. Despite having credible witnesses to testify on his behalf, the court still found him guilty. Now, in more recent years, David Ayala and his cousin James Soto were freed after a judge exonerated them both in December 2023. After 42 years in prison for a wrongful conviction based only on coercion and no physical evidence, the two innocent men were released. 42 years is too long for anyone to wait for justice, and it makes one wonder how many others are gone for life after wrongfully being convicted.